everybody to the guest panel with E.M. Carroll and Faith Erin Hicks. This is the part where you clap. I'm the moderator. My name's James, but you're not here for me, you're here for them. So we'll just get started. I'll give a brief intro for both of them. We'll ask some questions. We'll ask some questions for about half an hour, and then we'll open it up if anyone else has questions. And then we'll be out of here. So E.M. Carroll is an award-winning comic artist who has written works such as When I Arrived at the Castle and most recently A Guest in the House. And is venturing up on the third floor as well, so give a huge hand to E.M. Carroll. Thank you for coming all the way to Winnipeg. Thanks for having me for this. And Faith Erin Hicks is a Vancouver-based award-winning graphic novelist whose works include the graphic novels Ride On and Hockey Girl Loves Drama Boy, so please give a friendly hello to Faith Erin Hicks. I guess we're not here for me, we're here for you. So my first question to you folks is, and anyone can jump in, like, how did you two get started doing comics and art in the way you do?
Well, it's sort of funny because we were saying this. We both went to Sheridan College in Oakville, outside Toronto, and Faith was a year ahead of me, and she gave me my tour of Sheridan in 2002.
Yeah, long time ago.
Test. So I think that's where we both started. And I didn't do well at Sheridan, so I think I went into animation eventually, but then that led into comics. I'm sure it was probably similar.
Yeah.
Not that you didn't do well, but that you went from animation.
No, I also did not do well. So coincidentally, my next graphic novel, which was just announced online, is called In Betweens, and it is a little bit based on my experiences at Sheridan College, and the experience of achieving a dream, which was to go to animation school, this incredibly prestigious animation school, because I was a big Disney kid in the 90s. I loved Disney animated movies. I wanted to work in animation, and then when I got to animation school, I was like, oh no, this is not what I imagined it would be. Struggled through my time there and then graduated and worked in the animation industry for a few years. But all through the time that I was going to school and also working in animation, I was making comics on the side. I had a web account and I had a website and I would post my comics online. And that allowed me to develop my voice as a creator and get much, much better at drawing. If you've ever seen my super old comics, which I'm sure not many of you have, they're very poorly drawn, but drawing for free, putting my work online, it allowed me to develop my skills as a writer and artist. And I got good enough that publishers basically noticed. So I started getting published by primarily First Second Books, which is the graphic novel in Frank Macmillan, and it also was published by them. Here I am, good Lord, like many, many years later, like 20.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because you gave me the tour because I knew you from Technology 101. Sorry, your first comic.
Yes.
And but also, was it on Elfwood? Were you on Elfwood?
I believe so. Has anyone heard of Elfwood?
Yeah.
Oh my God! Yeah. Okay.
Because I remember posting fan art for you on Elfwood that I was drawing with colored pencils. So But that's so funny. I completely forgotten that until you mentioned that, because that was how we got in touch to do the tour. And Elfwood was a site. This is how old this is.
Yeah.
How Elfwood would work was it was a fantasy gallery, and you would submit. You go to a website and submit the art you wanted to have posted, and then a team of moderators would take 2 weeks to decide if that art could be posted. And then sometimes it couldn't. And then that was how it worked. Like you had to wait 2 weeks to have something on the internet. It's so crazy.
Yeah. And like that site was strict. Like
it was very strict.
They basically were like they would like I never did typical like high fantasy art. You know, I think they wanted like fairies and elves and like those types of things, and I never really drew that. And all the time I would submit my artwork to the site and it would get rejected for like not being fantasy enough, you know? But yeah, I remember finding your artwork, and I remember I drew fan art of your characters as well.
Oh
like,
my god,
I can't remember their names.
I can't either. I don't know. I know that I was on Elfwood all the time. But like that's the thing, like you get, if you're just like, that's probably how I got into comics too. So, like reading comics at the time, and like you want to make your own comics, and you have your own like OCs and whatever, and you create your own thing. But I had a similar experience going to Sheridan. Where
I feel like so many people are traumatized by that school.
This does tie into comics too, because I don't think I would be making comics without knowing that I didn't want to do animation like this. Because the program when we went, I was the last year of it actually. It was a 3-year program where you were doing classical animation, so that's like pencil, flipping the paper, like old school Disney animation. And after that they switched to 3D and Flash, rip. But but I thought going there, I was like, well, I wanted to be a comic artist, but I was like, but nothing I draw looks like any comics that are made, so I'd love to just work anything in art. I can't be a fine artist, so I'll go to this prestigious school if I can get in. And I thought once I'm there, they'll teach me the trick of how animation works, because surely you're not drawing 12 drawings a second. That would be crazy.
Oh no, little did you know. That is the trick.
12 to 24. So I went, and that was the trick, and I just don't have that sense of like the timing for animation, and it just bounced off me. I didn't do well. I got told by one of the teachers that I couldn't draw.
Oh, I had the exact same experience.
Yeah. It was just this funny thing, like, so you clearly can't draw. How'd you get into the school? I was
oh
like,
my god.
So it's fine.
I would just like to say that my entire career is motivated by spite. Like, I literally, I was just like, I'm gonna, because I had a similar experience where I had a very negative interaction with a teacher who was just like, you should not have graduated. Literally told me that on the day I graduated. And I was just like, fine, I'm just gonna go and draw all my comics and,
because
like, here I am.
I was like, I don't like doing this sort of rhythm of drawing, but I was like, I got a comic, I was just talking about this, I got a job at a Flash studio doing like, just not even animation, like setting up Flash scenes for animators to animate, and I was like, perfect. This is like all I want. Like something that pays me, I can go home, I can work on my own stuff, because I just did drawings and stuff like that. All my friends were doing comics at the time, so I decided I really wanted to do that, so I started messing around with putting comics on LiveJournal. And then from there, like you just sort of like build momentum of like, if people like it, and then that eventually turned into me getting interest from publishers and then getting into books. There you go. So,
And one thing that I think is worth pointing out is like the comics industry has changed so much in 15 years. Like when we were starting out, what exists now with the book market in particular, so where you can be published by a traditional book publisher and they will pay you in advance, sometimes it's not very much money, and then they will publish your graphic novel as like a solid one edition. Like that just didn't exist back in the aughts. And like I remember when I was realizing that animation was not the field that I wanted to go into, I remember being like, well, I really love comics, I really love making comics, but everything that's published is like DC and Marvel, and like there's no place for me there. So for the longest time it was like, how is it possible for anyone to make a living in comics if they don't draw like Marvel or DC comics? And now it's just so different. And it's been really interesting to sort of be a part of that, be a part of that change, and all of a sudden see publishers realizing that there are readers out there who are really hungry for graphic novels, and especially kids. Like there were no comics published for kids, like for the longest time, and a lot. I remember being a kid who loved comics and feeling like there was nothing for me on the market. I loved like For Better or For Worse. I loved Calvin and Hobbes. I read a ton of Doonesbury because it had
that's the thing. Like I read anything that was comics. I read like the newspaper. I would just read any comic. And then read Doonesbury. Like this is very Gretchen's commentary of,
US politics?
Pierre
I
Trudeau.
guess.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know, anything about this, but I just read it because it was.
Yeah, because it was comics,
Yeah.
because it was a story, and now it's so different, and you're seeing an entire generation of readers growing up with graphic novels being given to them, and it can always be better, but it's like, I feel like more diverse voices are really being published right now, and that's really exciting, really interesting.
But yeah, I think it was probably like Raina had Smile.
Yes.
And that really kind of punched a hole.
Yeah, and I'm friends with Raina. I've known her for a really long time. The very first comic convention I ever went to was in 2007, and it was this tiny little con in Toronto, and I met her there. And at the time, she was doing Babysitter Club graphic novels, and when Smile came out, it was a real shock to the industry. Scholastic did not anticipate that this book would become what it became, this million-selling book that revolutionized an industry. At that time, the most successful book format graphic novel was Bone by Jeff Smith, and that was really successful. But they'd never been able to replicate that. So Smile coming out and revealing that there was a young audience, that there was a female audience that really craved comics, that was. It changed the industry, but it was this very slow process, and a lot of people being like, I don't know, do kids really want to read comics? We don't know. Where is the data? I remember in around 2007, 2008, DC Comics launched a line of comics for girls, and it was called Minx.
I was just about to bring it up.
Oh my God, were you asked to pitch?
No, somebody I was at Sheridan with. Vera Broswell, who went on to be an animator and picture book, genius.
Caldecott winning.
Yeah, exactly. She's done a few things. She was like, I got offered to draw for Minx, and she's like, and they wanted her to quit. She would have to quit school.
Really? Oh wow.
Yeah. She's like, do I drop out for Minx?
Oh, I'm glad she didn't. Yeah.
No, that's good. But just the idea that was what was the a huge tear to be wow, I got picked for this imprint that did not.
It lasted about a year and a half.
Minx did not pan out.
No, it did not pan out. And what they were doing is manga was really popular, and the wisdom at the time was basically girls will read comics, but they will only read manga. So DC Comics basically created this line of comics, black and white comics, specifically to appeal to the manga reader. Very ill-advised line of comics, but I was asked to pitch. So I went through the process of getting a pitch to them, and then the line was canceled. But then my pitch got picked up by First Second Books, and that became Friends with Boys, which came out in 2012. So that ended up working out really well for me. But yeah, around the time, I remember when Minx went under and DC Comics announced they were not pursuing it, they'd done some sort of, I don't know what you call it, a focus group or marketing group or something like that. And basically the marketing group was like, there is no audience. There is no audience of women and girls reading comics. There's not, none for American comics. It's all manga, that's all they want to read. They're not interested in anything else. So there's no point in making comics if you're not in Japan, basically, for women and for girls. So yeah, wild times. It seems insane nowadays. It seems insane with the success of Smile, with the success of Raina, with the success of all of the different types of people who have come through this industry in the past 10 years. But that was the mindset back in the aughts. And I don't know, I'm so glad it's different now.
Yeah. And you work mostly in YA
Yes.
teen for now. And Faith kind of exposed you to me and said you used to do that as well a little bit. So is there a different process for making YA content, or is it kind of the same creative juices, or do you have to get in the mind of a teenage girl a little bit or anything?
I'm very mature.
Just normal. Yeah, I'll just say this because I don't have a ton to say about it. I don't have the experience you do on it. The YA books I've done have been for writers, so I've just been the artist. So I haven't necessarily had to do that. My first book, Through the Woods, was It's a collection of short horror stories that was published by a YA imprint of Simon & Schuster, and I only went with them because I just liked the editor the most. Like, she seemed to be willing to give me the most leeway and let me do, what I wanted, because we were talking about this earlier. Like, people, when you're making horror aimed at kids, people are always like, oh, you gotta tone it down, you gotta do this. Through the Woods, I just made what I was gonna make anyway, and then it turns out it does well for any age, I think, depending on your tastes. So that didn't really come up with me so much, but I think that's sort of like the key to making like horror for kids, especially, is just like, fine, kids. They'll sort themselves out. They'll weed themselves out for the kids who don't like it.
A little bit of trauma. So.
Yeah.
I feel for me, I have made a ton of middle grade and YA books, and initially I just sort of fell into the age category because of the stories that I was telling. So I mentioned Friends with Boys, and that was actually my 4th published graphic novel, but it was the first one that gave me any notice in the industry. And it's a little bit based on my teenage experiences. I was homeschooled until high school, and then I went to a public high school. I have three brothers. The main character has 3 brothers, so it was based on those experiences. So I just sort of set out making the kind of comics that I wanted to read, and then, because I was a lot younger at the time, so, and then, I've kind of made comics for my teenage self, because it's like I didn't get the opportunity to read these comics. And then so the middle grade stories that I've written and drawn, so I did a fantasy trilogy called The Nameless City, very inspired by Full Metal Alchemist, Avatar: The Last Airbender, Bone by Jeff Smith. So, the great stories that resonated with me as someone who enjoys fantasy. And then I also just published a book called Ride On, which is based on my experiences as a horse girl, grew up loving horses and riding and all that stuff. And then most recently, I did a book called Hockey Girl Loves Drama Boy, and I've never done romance before, so it was like my crack at that particular genre. And it's about like messy teens being awkward and then should we kiss? That sort of thing. So initially, I feel like I just sort of set out to make the stories that I wanted to make, and they coincidentally fell within a particular genre, or a particular age genre. Now I'm actually at the point where it's like I would like to do what Em does. I'm attracted to horror. I'd like to do books for adults. Not to say that I won't do books for kids or teens in the future, but I'm interested in branching out. I haven't had too many issues with like publishers wanting to change things or wanting to temper things. I remember doing a panel on why do YA with Gene Yang, who did American Born Chinese and Lunar New Year Love Story, a wonderful guy. And he talked about how it's like his own like internal prudishness, I guess, that draws him to that. And honestly, I understand, because like I'm kind of like that too. Like I'm a little hesitant. I'm kind of a people pleaser, and it's like, I don't know, that's kind of how those particular age groups can be. You're writing for that particular age groups. And now I'm at the point where it's like, okay, I'm ready to enter like my adult, don't give a crap stage and make like really weird comics and weird art. So yeah, we'll see.
It's like that weird thing of like in books where it's like Through the Woods gets marketed as like a YA or kids book, because there's no nudity or sex in it.
Yeah.
But there is like a guy gets shot in the face.
Yeah.
So like, but like that's fine.
Yeah.
Or like, seeing this corpse is fine. So I think that's also how I like fell into it, because I wasn't putting like any sort of sex in the comic, and so people just assume it's for whoever. But in my more recent books, I decided I wanted to. We were talking about this earlier too. Like I want to do more adult narratives, and again, things that you're not necessarily seeing a huge market for, and hopefully it will open up, because like I know so many cartoonists who do have these ideas for these like very inspired by manga, often more mature storylines and books, but you just have to convince people.
Yeah, like
not readers.
Yeah, like that's the thing. I do.
Publishers.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Publishers can be reluctant to go into certain genres or certain age groups where the numbers are not there. You know, there hasn't been a proven book successful in that particular genre, and that's basically what we saw in the aughts, where you know it was like, oh, Smile. Well, there's no reader. You know, there's no women or girls out there that want to read a story about a girl who has, you know, a dental trauma and that kind of thing. That doesn't exist. And then Smile comes out. It's like, oh no, there are millions of those types of readers. So I feel like the adult graphic novel market, and I specifically mean graphic novels because there's publishers like Image and Dark Horse and IDW and Fantastic Graphics and Drawn and Quarterly who do put out books for adults. But it feels like, I guess with the exception of like Drawn and Quarterly and Fantastic Graphics, it feels like that's not the book market. Like typically the books are published first as floppy comics and then put into a trade format and published that way. So yeah, it's an interesting time. I feel like, yeah, the adult book market is very underdeveloped, and I don't know, hopefully I can contribute to it in the future. I was very inspired by Em's book, A Guest in the House. You know, I feel like that is peak adult graphic novel right there. So ready for it.
There's no nudity.
I don't know.
Yeah, I was curious because you said you want to get into horror and you're like horror comic aficionado kind of thing. What is it about like the themes and the imagery of horror that inspires you or that you're drawn to it?
I've always been a huge horror fan. Like I've talked about this before, but like that's how I bonded with like my dad and my older brother. Was they would watch horror movies and I wanted to hang out with them, so I was watching horror movies too, which meant that I was watching them when I was like 4. But like I also didn't have, like again, mileage varies depending on the kid. I didn't have nightmares from them. I was scared of like other stuff. I was scared of like a weird light in the bathroom, but like I wasn't scared of watching Silence of the Lambs or whatever. And I was allowed to watch like whatever, except when there was anything like sexual happening on screen or nudity. Like my dad would be like, this part kind of drags. Fast forward, like, cover my eyes. There's all these movies that I can rediscover when I get older, and I'm like, oh wow, okay, I did not remember the scene. But yeah, so I've always like I got into it through that, but I just find it's a combination of things. I find it fun to draw. I find it fun to draw like gore and weird horror stuff, and also the added, you know, there's all sorts of problem solving and puzzle solving that with comics in terms of telling a story, and I find that when you also want to add like creating tension or like that kind of scary atmosphere to it, it's like another fun puzzle for me to try and solve. So I just like
Can't really jump scare someone with a page.
yeah, I mean it's difficult. So like, you know, you get to it's just I don't know why, it's like satisfying to me. And I think it's also more satisfying to me because I'm like super controlling. So animation did work great for me because it's a super team oriented thing, and I just want to be able to control every aspect that I can until it goes through a reader's hands, then I can't control anything. But yeah.
That's the best thing about comics. It's like one person can
Yeah.
make a graphic novel
Yeah.
and you control every aspect of it,
Yeah.
potentially. I'm actually fairly new to horror. I feel like I got more into it over the pandemic, but I've also always like really loved the Alien franchise. I like movies where there's a creature, you know, and it's like seeing people in a stressful situation respond to that creature, how they, you know, potentially support each other, potentially do not. I feel like I'm more interested in story than art sometimes, which I don't know. It's one of the cool things about comics is like hearing from other creators and how they approach the medium, but also like what they're most attracted to, like in creating comics. Like I've never really drawn stuff that's weird or particularly gory. I did a prequel comic for the video game The Last of Us. And that was the only thing where I was like drawing gore, and I was honestly a little repulsed when I was drawing it. I was like, oh, this is disgusting. What am I doing? But yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm more interested in the stories that horror potentially can tell, like seeing how people in survival situations and how a particular group of people will respond to that situation. I don't know. I really love Alien. I just watched the first movie recently because it was my birthday and I wanted to sit down and actually watch it on my birthday. day. It's so good. It's so good. Oh my god. Yeah. And it's like, I mean, that's the problem with the space horror genre. It's like there is a perfect movie out there, and what more can you do with that genre? So that is my struggle right now. It's like I want to work in this genre, but what do I have to say about it?
Yeah, for sure. So we are reaching like the bit where I want to open up to the audience. I want you guys to have like a good amount of time. But so I'll just ask one more question.
Sure.
Question you probably get a lot. What's next? What's going on next? What are we working on? What do we want to see happen in our careers?
Well, so I have another book coming out for a second, but it won't be for a while since I did like really burn out after I finish a book. I tend to burn out for a while. I think I'm never gonna draw again. And then I do.
What do you do when you're burned out?
Hang on. I don't like. I don't know. I was talking about this earlier too because I was finishing that book in the pandemic, so like I had lost all sense of it. It was just like a weird experience, and also like I was dealing with a lot of my own stuff and creating the book, and like so it was just not a pleasant place to be. So the short answer for where I'm going next with my work is I'm drawing something really fun, and I'm not doing therapy to myself through it. A little bit actually, there is a bit, but like I'm not. I have often felt that comics for me can become like a compulsion where I'm working through a certain thing, and I want to deal with it, and then I like to humiliate myself by sharing it with everybody else.
Strangest, most hostile form.
Yeah, exposure based. So I'm just, now I feel on much more solid footing. So I'm like, I just want to draw something like fun. It's still going to be horror and inspired by like my past work, but it will be a full graphic novel. That's all I'll say for now.
Keep an eye
because who knows how it will more.
Yeah, I mentioned my next book. It's coming out in 2026 from First Second Books. It's older middle grade. Characters are in their early teens based on my experiences at animation college. It's called In Betweens, and yeah, it's about two sisters who go to this intensive animation summer camp. Animation is their dream, and they find out things are
crushed.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you'll see. I don't want to spoil it. It's about it's just about the artistic process, and I guess finding what's next when you realize what you thought you wanted didn't. It isn't what you wanted. It isn't actually what you wanted. So yeah, there's that one. I have two other projects on the horizon. One is actually horror. And very, very different from anything I've done in the past. Unfortunately, it's a licensed comic. Unfortunately, it has not been announced yet, so can't say anything about that. And then I also have another YA book on the horizon. And after that, I'm gonna make something real weird. I don't know what it is.
How many books do you have published?
Like 16. Yeah, and I also write Avatar: The Last Airbender comics for Dark Horse, and they're not drawn by me. They're drawn by a lovely artist, Peter Wortman. So yeah, I do that as well. I don't know.
Keeping yourself booked and busy.
Yeah, booked and blessed. Yeah, I don't know. It's like comics take so long to make, and like I'm considered a fast artist that I can turn around a book in like 14 months.
Yeah, that's wild.
But it doesn't feel like that when you're working on it. It just doesn't. And there's always going to be someone faster than you. I think like people like I don't know, like Molly Ostertag, who like turns around a book in like 6 months, and I'm just like, I don't know how.
It's like, do you ever see that, there's like a comic that Becky Cloonan did, where she's like, I'm drawing comics, I'm drawing so fast, like the wind's blowing through her hair, she's drawing, then it pans out, and she's on a giant snail.
Yeah.
I think about that a lot.
Yeah, that's how it feels, you know. And then, I don't know. And then I feel like readers' memories go really quickly. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I'm just gonna have a therapy session right now. Talk about all my stresses, all my career stresses.
Awesome. Well, thank you for talking to me for a bit. Now I want to open up for questions from the audience. You can just kind of raise your hand and I'll tag you. Yeah, go ahead.
You kind of touched on it a little bit with like Bone by Jeff Smith or Calvin and Hobbes or Disney. But what are the inspirations for both of you guys? What sort of motivated you to get into comics or even just in general to make creatives?
Yeah, I have three three major comic book influences, but some of them came later. So Jeff Smith is obviously the main inspiration for me. Like I was kind of trying to make comics before I started reading Bone, and I remember I found good lord, this was probably 2001, and there was no comic section in the Indigo bookstore, but I remember finding a copy of the third volume of Bone. So I think Bone is 7 or 8 volumes, and the third volume, I hadn't read volumes 1 and 2, in a Chapters bookstore, and reading it and being like, what? And just light exploded in my brain, and I'd never seen a comic like it. And I grew up reading newspaper comics. I grew up reading Tintin and Asterix like every Canadian kid. And I was just like, this is comics? Like, what? I bumped into Jeff Smith at TCAF, Toronto Comic Arts Festival. I bumped into him at a Starbucks in 2012 and lost my mind in the middle of the Starbucks and was just like, ah! And he was really nice. And I met him several times after that, but I can't be normal around him. He's too much of a hero. So he was a huge, huge influence. And after that, when I started making comics, another big influence was Naoki Urasawa. He's a Japanese manga artist. He's known for doing adult comics, typically for men. He did a book called Monster, which is a serial killer manga. It's awesome, highly recommend it. I did a book called Pluto, which is science fiction, highly recommend that. And then a number of his other works are published. Those two are my favorite, published in English. And then I found Full Metal Alchemist by Hiromu Arakawa, which just, again, blew my mind. And Nameless City is very influenced by that. I really wanted to do action, a lot of fight scenes. She's amazing. Oh yeah, that was actually something really cool, finding a woman comic book artist that did this huge epic action adventure comic. That was really awesome. Those are my main comic influences. Growing up, I enjoyed fantasy. I really liked Lloyd Alexander. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He did a fantasy series called The Chronicles of Prydain that was written in the 60s, but it's still wonderful. And yeah, I don't know. I read a ton of books, and just the comics I read I enjoyed, but again, it was stuff like Tintin or Asterix or For Better or For Worse. It wasn't the type of comics I necessarily wanted to make. I felt like, I just had to go in and make them myself to make the kind of comics that I wanted to read.
Yeah, my main comic growing up was Archie.
Oh yeah.
And I was obsessed with it, even though it's not good. But I was really, I think I was drawn to it because I was really obsessed with Dan DeCarlo's strips.
Oh yeah, they're so good.
The 50s ones, and that. For me, in Archie comics, it was the only comic, because all the rest were just superhero comics to me, where there were really pretty girls. So I was they're so beautiful, the Dan DeCarlo ones, and so I imprinted on those, and this book about how to draw hot dames, which I still think about. It's inspired so many bad habits with my drawing. So I think that was my first major thing, and then when I got into I would read just any comic. I would read For Better or Worse, there were the treasury of for parenting comics and stuff. I'm 10 reading these. But then getting into high school, I read manga. So Rumiko Takahashi was the major one with Ranma, and then Meizan Ikoku. I also read only the foreign chapters. And Sandman was very big because that was something that was sort of fantasy and weird and realistic, and that kind of inspired me to want to make comics. But again, I didn't think there was a market for anything I could make. I can't break into this, and I can't draw that well. So I don't know. I don't know where to put this feeling, but as I grew up more, I think a lot more of my influence now is, peers, but also still manga. I'm wearing a Berserk shirt. It's my comfort shirt when I go to work. And I love Berserk. It's one of my favorite pieces of art in general. And so that has been a huge inspiration to me. And just any, I can't remember who I was saying this to earlier, but any art where it feels like a compulsion, that the artist was I have to render this like this, or I have to move this quickly and draw this fast. that feels really good to me for some reason. Like it feels good on my eyes. So like, and that's definitely the feeling I get from Berserk. But yeah, I think like reading manga did open me up to like different sorts of stories that were just, you know, superhero or comedy strips or stuff like that. Even though Rumiko Takahashi is like very funny. And that also influenced like, you know, you copy the drawings. Like as a kid, you're just like drawing it over and over and posting it to Elfwood. So yeah. So
Not fantasy enough, reject.
yeah, I put Elfwood years on. Yeah.
Does anyone else have anything they'd like to ask? If not, I have some more questions. Don't worry, I came prepared. So, yeah. Oh, sorry.
I guess I like started doing comics on like the trash time during third grade on recess. What was like the first time you like kind of had the impulse to do comics?
Oh, I actually have, yes. So in grade 1, I was a rabid horse girl, and the thing that I wanted the most was my very own pony, and I made a comic about going to a stable, and it was incredibly poorly drawn, but you know, I mean, it was a grade 1, you know, so I was like 5 or 6, right? I made a comic about going to a stable, and my mom points at a horse and is like, this horse, and I was like, no, and then I found another horse, and I was like, this horse, and that's the entire comic, and that was the horse that I bought. So that is literally the very first comic I ever made.
What was the title of it?
It was, I
The
didn't
horse
have
that
a
I
title.
bought.
Yeah.
It's funny you mention that because I also in grade 1, I never really thought of them as comics, but like they would have just like a bin of blank books, like.
Oh yeah.
And and my mom kept them, so I have them. And there's one that is my favorite because I think the teacher spoke to my parents about it. And it's called Cat and Dog. No, it's like Betty the Dog, because I was obsessed with Archie. Betty the Dog and her friend Cat in Cat's Day Up. And comic is like, there's like, you know, I write really poorly on this side and then the things are over here. Betty the dog goes to the fireworks. She's looking for her friend Cat. And Cat's baby, that's what it was. And Cat's baby was there too. And then she's like, well, where's Cat? And there's like fireworks and whatever. And then the next page is Betty, having found where Cat is, she's looking through a basement window. And there's like Cat and Cat's baby. And then this guy with like a knife. And he cuts Cat's tail off. So there's his blood. And then Betty the dog jumps in and she takes out the bad dog and the guy with the knife and she drops them in a shark's mouth or something like that. And they go to fireworks. So that was probably like my earliest, that kind of thing. I didn't think of it as a comic, but like when I actually started thinking about like comics, it was total rip-offs of Rumiko Takahashi. Like, I think I had like one that like, you know, I drew out and my dad took me to like his office so that I could like photocopy pages from it, and it only ended up being like 14 pages long. It was of course a grand epic.
Oh yeah. I mean 14 pages, that's huge.
Yes,
Yeah.
So with like the tria marker, the one gray tria marker. But yeah, so that was probably like when I first started like really trying to make comics. But then again, like once I went to college, I didn't make comics online that would continue until I was 27. I
remember the internet fervor that popped up around your through the woods that happened.
Yeah, I had
You
like
went
one.
viral.
I went in 2010, which again I'm so glad I started then. There's so many. There's such a glut of amazing artists online. Back then, I think I would get like an article on like some gaming website because I drew.
Yeah.
Can you imagine like how like fallow the fields? But like, so yeah, I didn't draw until I was like 27 because I was just like, nobody wants this.
Yeah.
I can't do this. I just had this like idea that like I could not do it. So I think like the first comic I made online, I decided I'm gonna draw badly. Like I was really worried about following the rules. It's probably a very animation school thing of like, it has to be on model. I have to like have this fully realized movement and whatever. And when I realized I could just draw badly.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like the thing about like what's online now versus what was online in the early aughts. Like I gained, so my very first comic was basically a very first online comic. The comic that I actually drew consistently and then finished was a Buffy the Vampire Slayer ripoff about like a teen girl who, you know, had normal teen girl problems and, you know, friends and went to high school, and then there was like all this supernatural stuff. And it was like, the artwork was very amateurish. Like all of it was extremely amateurish. Like I actually never had the problem of like looking or like making comics and being like, oh, it looks bad. Like, I don't know, it's weird because like now I'm a bit of a perfectionist, but I feel like a lot of people will say that to me where it's like, I need to learn to draw before I make comics. Sorry?
No, it's like, you don't need to.
Yeah, and that was kind of my feeling. It was like, I just had this story that I wanted to tell in the format of comics, so I was just gonna do it. And like, I did not know how to draw comics, I did not know how to do really anything, and then my drawing skills were really poor, but by the time I finished this comic, like, I drew it over the course of 5 years, updating weekly, and I would update every week with like in between like 2 pages to like 15 pages. And you know, by the time it was over, it was 5 years later, and this comic was over 750 pages long. And I had a readership, like I had a real community around that comic simply because I kept it going. You know, the art was really ugly, it was not well written or anything. And like, you know, I've had like grown adults who are like professional comic creators come up to me at cons and say things like, you know, I read this comic when I was in middle school and, you know, like I really loved it, and I just like die with embarrassment because it's like, this is my really awkward early work. But back then it was like just putting something on the internet that was consistently updated would get you a readership. And nowadays it's like, you know, I'm not on Webtoon very often, but like I'll look at it occasionally, and it's like, oh my god, the comics
so
are like
hard to find stuff. Yeah, there's so
you know, and every comic is like full color and like updates like 3 times a week, and I'm just like, what the heck? Like, how does anyone who was at the stage that I was at, that when I was doing Demonology 101, how did I get started? I just, it would be so intimidating. Like at the time when I was making webcomics, it was very rare to see a professional quality webcomic online. Like at the time, I feel like if you were a comics professional, it was sort of beneath you to put your work online. You know, like you were better than the internet. And now it's just so different.
Yeah.
Awesome. We have time for one more question if someone has one that's burning. EM and Faith are here for the full weekend at your tables on the 3rd floor, so if you come out of the panel and you're like, shoot, I forgot to ask, that's okay, you can go over and ask them. Yeah.
Sure, I'll have a quick one. Are you doing any more Avatar books?
Oh, yes. Yes, I am. Just signed the contract for 3 more. So they're coming. Yeah, I love Avatar. Please don't yell at me online about Avatar. So many people have. And it's like, I just want to say I'm a huge fan of Avatar. I love working on it. Yes, please
don't yell at me.
Yes, please don't yell at me.
It's the Lord.
Yes, oh my gosh. The Avatar fans are so intense. Like,
Yeah, that's brave of you.
yeah. But yeah, very excited for Avatar. We're Avatar.
Awesome. Well, you guys are at Valley Robinson tonight for an evening with
At 7?
Faith and Ian at 7. Yeah, with Sam Dico, the artistic director. But I think that'll be about it for this panel. So
Thank you.
Our little Winnipeg and experience in all its glory.
It's my first time here.
Same.
Yay. And do you like it so far? Maybe I should ask.
Yes, it's been very fun. The con has been lovely.
Yeah.
And I've already had nice talks with people coming up and telling me that books that I published less than 10 years ago they read in middle school.
Yeah.